At a certain point in our work, we realized that we needed to put much more emphasis on the ancestral healing work. The reason is because we saw how intergenerational patterns predetermine, which are the basis for certain processes and patterns in our life. People say we feel that we have individual symptoms, but not all the symptoms are always related to biographical wounding or the ways how we grew up in our childhood. So we opened the map more and more, and we saw that there is actually an amazing impact, especially on family systems and the way sometimes family systems feel entangled or feel a bit tighter, or it's harder to live your development when you meet your family members. And I think many of us have or had that experience. And so looking deeper at what are actually the patterns, what is repetitive in our family trees and family systems is and was very helpful to create some new movement. So we saw, of course, there is individual developmental work and we can all grow as individuals, but some of the things weren't responsive to that. And the more we included ancestral healing work, we saw that a new level of movement started to happen. And also we saw that there is a new level of grounding, that our ancestors are our roots, and our roots into and as the planet. So it creates a sense, or it reopens the sense, that we are the ecosystem, and a much deeper sense of interconnectedness, interdependence with the biosphere, which I believe is a very important aspect nowadays, especially nowadays when we see the absence thereof as climate change, and I see the healing of the duality between humans, nature, biosphere, the planet, as one of the core remedies for the current climate change development that we are seeing. And you can click on the link here on the page to learn more about our new offering about the Ancestral Healing Code. So nowadays, when we look into our world, we see what some people call the polycrisis, or a confluence of a lot of stress factors that are coming together, from wars to climate change to financial instability to the not knowing how our world's gonna develop. And when we look into our ancestry, first of all, our ancestry holds what I would call two different streams of data. One data stream is the resilience that many generations before us developed, because many of the generations before us went through adverse situations, difficult times themselves, and experienced trauma, or sometimes a lot of trauma, and also over the next few generations began to integrate some and heal some of that trauma and turn that into development. So we have been born into the aftermath, so to speak, of a long line of life living itself over and over again. And that's what we call ancestral resourcing. And when we put more attention on the power, the skills, the strength, the resilience that our ancestors handed over to us, so we can get a more conscious grounding in those qualities and make use of that resilience, and also be aware that lives in us, that lives in every cell of our body. On the other hand, I often say what our ancestors couldn't look at and what our ancestors couldn't deal with because it was too much, it was too overwhelming, it was too big, it was too painful, they handed over to us too. So we are sitting actually in and as the confluence of a lot of accumulated strength and self-healing capacity, and at the same time the trauma that still resides in our ancestral lineage that has been given to us in a way. And for us to move a step forward, to integrate what we can integrate, and also for us to open life into new dimensions and new creativity and new innovation that is not possible when the trauma is active and closed. And that's why I think as one of the answers to our current polycrisis is that we can make use of the strength and the resilience we carry. And there is a part in us that knows how to deal with crisis, because we are not the first generation that's going through one. at the same time, we want to also melt and stop the cycle of repetition. As Sigmund Freud already said, the repetition compulsion of trauma. We want to stop that in our lifetime so that the next generation can come into a more open, more free, and a charged with more possibilities, a life that is charged with more possibilities, so that we can bring the change that this current time of polycrisis is asking. And that's why working on the ancestral trauma transmission and on ancestral healing and ancestral awareness and communication, I think is an important work that we have to do now to become the answer that life asks us to be. There are many people that feel, oh, I don't have so much connection to my ancestors. Maybe I don't know much about my ancestors. But that doesn't really matter, because the fact that we are here means we do have ancestors, and we do have ancestors that made it enough for us to be here. So there's an unbroken line of life, and our bodies know that, even if our minds don't know that. If we don't have the cognitive or intellectual information, sometimes we can make a research and find out more about our ancestry, but sometimes we simply don't. And then we begin a journey through our body, like a sensing journey, not so much a kind of a knowing journey, a sensing journey, to listen to what our body says. And the body, I believe, is like a kind of an ancient hard drive that has been handed over from generation to generation. And every generation added their data to that hard drive and expanded the storage over time, so that we are still, and we are in a new way using that hard drive that is our physical body and all the information that's stored in it. So when we learn to activate our nervous system in a certain way, we actually can have access to the data, the information, or the codes of our ancestors. And that helps us to learn more, to connect more. And the deeper we connect to our ancestry, we feel that we are actually grounding ourselves more and more in our own life and healing disrupted relationships, healing some of the ancestral or intergenerational trauma, and developing more sensing awareness of our ancestry actually opens up flow and data streams in our own body. And that's energy that we have available to be creative, to be more related, to be more engaged, to also be spiritually more connected, to be more connected to Earth, the land, nature, planet, and to each other. And to bring the fluidity of liquefying our ancestral contractions and that intelligence into our daily life. And I think that's a very powerful work. And so, yes, some of us know a lot about our ancestral trees, some of us don't, some of us were adopted, but that is our way. It doesn't mean that one way is better than the other. It means that whatever is our starting point in this life is also defining our journey. And sometimes it's good to look at other people for inspiration, but not to compare ourselves if our journey is more difficult, less difficult, better, not so good as other people's journeys. But I'm taking the challenge, and through the journey that life gave me, I developed the wisdom that my soul is asking for. And I think that's a very powerful way to take ownership of one's own life story and biography and turn that into a blessing. Many people ask the question, so how does intergenerational trauma transmission work? So why does trauma get transmitted from one generation to the next? We know from wisdom traditions for thousands of years, and we begin to see in science, especially through epigenetic research, we see how trauma is being passed on to the next generations and develops similar symptoms in the following generations. So it also says that either we take ownership of the trauma that either we experienced or our ancestors handed over to us. And by taking ownership and responsibility, which means the ability to respond respond, we can turn the trauma into post-traumatic learning. And post-traumatic learning means we grow, we become more mature, we become more lively, we become more creative, we become more related. We feel that we are part of an interdependent system or interconnected system. And we also mature ethically, because a lot of the trauma of the history of humanity has been inflicted through the pain that we inflicted upon each other across centuries and millennia. And intergenerational healing means, on the one hand, that we pass on less, or we don't pass the trauma that we experienced on to the next generations in the same way that maybe we received it. And on the other hand, through our lifetime, we really use that energy and that learning for maturation and creativity. And that also means we generate more wisdom. And wisdom means the extent to which we can host the world within us, which means we experience less separation between us and the world, and we feel again that we are part of an amazing supercomputer that we call life. And so for ourselves, for our ancestors, for the future generations, integrating ancestral trauma that, as I said before, we see in the wisdom traditions, and we also see in the epigenetic research how trauma is being transmitted to the next generations, is actually, the integration is an amazing blessing. And that's something we all can do. And the more people do that, the more we grow and mature as humanity, which helps us to deal with the current challenges in a more mature way. So I think that's a win-win-win. So true responsibility means the ability to respond. But what does it mean to respond? Responsiveness means also that I'm connected to a sense, that I feel something. So either I can feel my ancestors. Responsibility doesn't mean that I'm responsible for what they did, but I'm responsible means I'm able to respond to the after effects of their actions or their trauma. So there is a responsiveness towards ancestors or generations that were here before us. But at the same time, responsibility or responsiveness is also towards the future generations, the generations that are not here yet. And that includes our own children and their children, but that also includes the generations that are unborn, that are potentially here, but haven't been born yet. And so developing a skill to be in touch with, to be in a subtle communication with the future generations is also a kind of a calibration of our compass needle, because the next generations bring a bigger world into our world than the one that we live in. Same as we bring a bigger world into the world of our ancestors. So there is an update, there's more complexity, there are more possibilities, there are more inventions, there's progress. So the evolutionary update is something that we can be in touch with and use as our own guidance and use as our North Star when we talk about sustainability, for example, or when we talk about our own life purpose. That guidance is incredibly important. And so being in touch with the future generations means also being in touch with the needs of the future generations, and that our actions and the way we live our life predetermines to a certain extent the possibilities that the future generations will have. So there's interdependence. This is what we call vertical interdependence. And we want to learn more about that, and we want to also harvest the insights and see how that can be a tremendous source of inspiration, innovation, creativity, and responsibility. Means the ability to respond to the future. And then we see time is not just a straight line from the past to the future, but time is the, if you will, retrocausal impact, the impact that the future has on now, not only what now has on the future. And I think that's the very interesting exploration that many wisdom traditions already talk about over thousands of years. The echo of the future means, usually we think about the echo as somebody screams in a cave and then you hear the echo of that scream. But on a more spiritual level, I often say that our calling to be on a path, our calling to be either on a spiritual path or to be on a self-development path is inspired by something. But usually we are following something that we don't know where it's coming from. It feels like a pull. It feels even hard to stop it, but we don't know what we are following. We are following a call, and the call leads us from one step to the next. And we could say the call, when we listen to the echo of the future, we are actually listening to the echo of our arrival, which at first sounds paradox. But when we listen deeper, it means also where we hear the call of the future or the echo of the future, we do know something. Even if it's not concrete knowledge, but something pulls us, something motivates us, something deeply interests us. And it looks like as if it's coming from a very deep place. So it's pretty essential. And for many people, once we start a self-development journey or a spiritual journey, we can't even think anymore about stopping it because it becomes our life. Like that pull becomes our life. And that's why listening to that which calls us and also listening to the echo of the future, that there is an impact of where we are going to, what we develop into is affecting us already now. And the more I listen to that, that becomes my guidance, that becomes my GPS, that becomes my North Star. And the more we rest in that and we can trust that North Star, it's becoming that very precise GPS in our life that guides our journey. And then you look back and say, oh, wow, what a way. But it wasn't all the time a way. It was the GPS was guiding you step by step by step by step. So how does the spiritual work and the ancestral healing work, how do they work together? We could say integration or healing is a way to describe coming deeper into our original movement. And trauma often is a reduction of our original movement. Trauma feels often like tighter, more contracted, more exaggerated, but also sometimes more absent and indifferent. And one way to accelerate the stream of our life, coming more into a flow, as some people would say, is through integration and healing work. The other way to increase our movement, to be more in a flow in life, is through spiritual work. And so it doesn't matter from which side of the practice we come. If it's more about, oh, I had some issues in my life, I really needed to take care of that, pushed me onto a path, and now I'm on the path and I discover more and more the spiritual dimension of that path. Or I was really drawn to the spiritual dimension and then I discovered, oh, I need to also do more integration and healing work or trauma work or ancestral trauma work, because that actually blocks parts of my life that do not open just through meditation or other spiritual practices. We see that these two often feel like a confluence. And then it shows that it's actually a holistic practice. The more I open up where I come from, the more it gets clearer where I'm going to. So the more I clarify my roots and the data that is stuck or stored in my ancestors or in the intergenerational data stream, the more my purpose, my life path gets clearer to me. And the more I practice my spiritual practice, I have more awareness, I have more inner space, I'm more connected to a bigger context in life than just my own personal context, so that I begin to get a taste of the transpersonal dimension of life, which actually reinforces again the way we heal and the way we integrate pains and wounds of the past. And it often becomes a resource. So if spirituality is not a bypass to the difficulties of life, but actually a resource to heal them, then it's an amazing collaboration. And so what we do offer is both like a path of inner development that is deeply grounded in the spiritual and mystical dimension, because these two together are an amazing couple. So how can ancestral healing work and the latest modern psychotherapies can be combined? And I think absolutely yes. I think it's just, if ancestral work is not a bypass to do our developmental inner work, then ancestral healing work is an amazing support. Because, of course, there's attachment trauma, there's developmental trauma, there's maybe also trauma that we experienced as grown-ups. But the developmental trauma is usually based on the pre-existing trauma in the family system. And that is, again, based on some experiences of our ancestors and their ancestors. So it's like a wave that goes through the pipes of our ancestry, the roots of our ancestry, and the archaeology of our ancestry. And that's why I believe if we know how to discern and if we know how to address and access different developmental levels in somebody's individual biographical development, and at the same time, we can hold a space for ancestors and for everybody who works with clients. If we have more awareness of our own ancestors, what I call our ancestral nervous system becomes more open, accessible, fluid, and sensitive, which means we can sense our clients and their ancestors clearer and clearer and clearer. And so we naturally begin to hold a space that is bigger, which means it enables deeper healing and process work because the container gets deeper and more open. And that's why doing our own healing work and opening our own ancestral lineages and sensing and awareness is actually an amazing skill building way to hold space for clients. And then the therapeutic modalities combined with the ancestral healing work just open the map more and enable deeper and more fundamental integration processes. So you can find all the information about the course on this page, and I love to invite you to this course and see you there. Thank you.